Hi, I'm David Kolbe, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and if this is your first time listening to the show, this is where we explore how to work with time, with attention, and with productivity, both intentionally and effectively, efficacy, all that stuff. And we have productive conversations along the way. And today I'm joined by David Kolbe. David is a leader in the field of human performance and conative strengths. We talk about conative because I've not heard the term before. You'd think I would, considering the realm that I'm in, but nope, I have not. And so we dive into that, as well as a whole bunch of other things from his book that he has co-authored called Do More, More Naturally, Empowering Effortless Success and the Freedom to Be Yourself. Now, as the CEO of Kolbe Corporation, he is dedicating and has dedicated his career to helping people understand and leverage their instinctive ways of taking action, which is a key and really often overlooked element of being productive. David was instrumental in developing the Kolbe A Index, which is the only proven tool designed to unlock how we naturally take action and get things done. In this conversation, we'll explore why productivity isn't just about what you know or how you feel, but also how you instinctively operate. We'll break down the differences between cognitive, affective, and conative strengths, and how knowing your unique work style can really transform how you approach tasks and what it really means to do more naturally. So without further ado, let's get to this conversation, a productive one at that, with David Kolbe. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for a productive conversation.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm looking at this book, and I'm doing video, so it's always kind of fun when I'm doing video for me to make sure I'm putting it in my proper hand. I'm a lefty. But anyway, it's do more, and this is the key that I loved when we were talking about naturally. Do more naturally, empowering effortless success and the freedom to be yourself. So right out of the gate, naturally, this is an area where I think, and I want to get your perspective on it. Of course, the book goes into it very deeply. We'll have some time to have a bit of questions around that. But have we been doing things unnaturally for far too long? And this is why you felt the need to put this book out into the world with Amy?
We've been doing things in a way that people told us to do them, and we just didn't know what naturally was for us. So, look, there are some blessed people who just for whatever reason, they just did it in a way that was natural for them, and that's great. But what we've seen is, and there are so many reasons for it. I won't go through all of them now. We can get to some of that, but most people just don't really know the part of themselves that drives the way they take action. So they listen to advice from other people, well-meaning advice that works for those other people giving the advice and works for lots of other people. But so that's part of the problem, is a lot of times it can be very seductive. It's, oh, okay, well, Mike does it that way, so I'm going to do it the way that's successful for Mike.
Right.
And it's great for Mike, and if it's great for you as well, fantastic. But so many times it's not what's natural for you. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of wasted energy trying to make it happen that way.
One of the things that I appreciate about when I was going through the book is this idea of nuance that I could read again and again. It wasn't implicitly stated per se, but that I think is one of the core elements of kind of being able to do things more naturally, is embracing the nuance. You just mentioned it. What works for Mike doesn't work for necessarily anybody else, but some parts might.
Right.
But we're kind of living in a world where absolutist kind of thinking is prevalent. It's either this or that, black or white, left or right, what have you. How do you break free from that in a world when it comes to being productive, so that you can embrace the nuances that come with, the doing that we need to do?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of steps to it. The first thing is having a better sense of who you are. I mean, this is ancient wisdom. Know yourself. It's so easy to be swayed by other people when you really don't have a good understanding of yourself, and across all kinds of dimensions. If you don't know your values, It's really easy for somebody to come in and say, this is what you should think or believe or put your time into. In terms of how we each naturally, kind of instinctively, is what we've seen, take action, people need to take a little time to figure that out. So that's number one, is understand yourself better. Then the next part is, once you have that understanding, be a better consumer. And again, this goes in so many areas, not just this one. But when you understand who you are and the way you thrive, you're better able to take the information in and listen to advice from other people and be discerning about it. Hey, I see how that works for other people, but it doesn't really work for me. So I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to seek out the advice that does fit who I am. So some of that's, I think nuance is a good way to put it. But as you were alluding to, we are strong believers in tearing down the notion that there's a one size fits all. And so I guess another kind of corollary piece to this is understanding, and it's part of being discerning and being a good consumer of advice and information. Understand why people are saying what they're saying. And lots of times, it's not that people are being bad by telling you that their way is the right way. They believe it is, and it is for them. And again, for other people, there's not much incentive for many people to say, hey, this is what I'm offering, selling, telling you about. But there are limits on it. Let me focus on the limits. People don't want to, that doesn't help them. They want to get the message across about what is important and what they're saying. And they don't tell you, here's where it should stop, or here's where you should start, finding another solution. So, but you should do that for yourself. Don't expect it from other people. That's fine. It's not their role, but know yourself, be confident in that, be a discerning consumer of information and advice, and then apply that and learn from it. That's probably the last step always. Is it's not just a matter of, oh, okay, well, yeah, I think this is going to work. Great, I do it. And I just keep plowing ahead. And if it doesn't work, I just keep plowing ahead, keep my head down. No, learn from it. What didn't work, you can always refine it.
Well, and that in an individual situation, that is challenging in one way. When it comes to organizations, though, right? Like that's a huge struggle, right? Like they end up being in an organization that kind of, I wouldn't say forces them, but they feel almost compelled to work against their natural tendencies because the organization or the environment doesn't support it, especially if it's rigid, right? So how can organizations, because this is an area that you have a lot of expertise in, but create space, for the employees to work more in a more natural way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the way you phrased the question. How can they make space for people to do it more? This isn't an all or nothing thing. So yes, I can and do go into organizations, and if they're open to it, say, hey, you are so rigid in the way something has to happen. And I try to show the organization, so this is kind of an answer to your question, show the organization, if you really want the results that you're talking about, you probably need to give people a little more leeway in the way they go about doing it. That does not mean compromise on the results. Be rigid about excellence, be rigid about, doing what people say they're going to do, and all of that, but give them more space, as you're putting it, to do it in their own way. Now, but even with that, there needs to be an understanding of limits on that. So are there some jobs that are more open-ended? Absolutely. If you're a record label and you're signing a new artist to make music, and this is kind of a classic in that industry, don't just tell them, well, here's what you have to do. Like,
Yeah.
that's not how musicians operate. You will not get their best work. If you're signing them, sign a great one and then let them do their thing.
Yeah. Rick Rubin talks a lot about that in the Creative Act, A Way of Being, right? Like, and even in his interviews, which is, it seems counterintuitive, but that's exactly the way it plays out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, in a corporate context, there are some jobs that are more like that, and there are other jobs that frankly are pretty rigid. It's, we've done this 100 times. Oh, and by the way, the consequences of a negative result are pretty dire. So for instance, you're running a nuclear power plant. Don't give people lots of leeway to experiment and see what works for them. That's nonsense. And again, they're not one size fits all. It's not just, let's everybody free to be themselves. No, some roles are more rigid. So identify those. And there the trick is, get the right people in those seats.
Right.
Hire the people that look like that are more systematic, routine oriented, follow procedures to a T, because there are people where that's how they thrive.
Hmm. Hmm.
We're kind of assuming the more open-ended artistic thing, as I was talking about, and Rick Rubin would talk about, that's not everybody. Even musicians, there are some musicians where it's all about give me a structure, a routine. I get in the studio at 8 o'clock every morning and I have to write a song, and this is my process. Great. The person who's like that, hold them to it.
Yep.
And by the way, that might be a person who's really good working in a nuclear power plant. I don't know. But if it's somebody who says, hey, let me sit down and I'm going to figure out what my day looks like, that role is not running a nuclear power plant.
Right.
When you identify the roles that do have more freedom, then I think the first thing, because you have to build confidence in an organization, especially when it's a change. So you say, hey, let's try this. Why don't you give Mike a little more leeway? Hold him accountable for the results. Give him more leeway in the way he's doing it and maybe how he collaborates with other people. And let's see what happens. And then when productivity increases, the results are not just maintained, but exceeded. You build the confidence. If you just go into a company and say, oh, the way you're doing it's wrong, do it this other way, even if they do it because somebody told them to, you won't have the buy-in and you'll have so much more resistance from people. So I like small incremental chunks to build trust and go from there.
Well, and I think if they're the right person, the right role, they'll find the dynamic elements that are within the rigidity as well that they can play with too, right? Like your example is there's elements of that nuclear power plant that must be adhered to, but there might be like something small, to your point, that you can have a little bit more leeway with it.
Right.
And I think those those opportunities and that ability to have openness there it's the willingness to have openness as opposed to being outright rigid. Like example, I'll give you a quick example. I live in a capital city in Canada where government work is often, doled out and distributed. And I ended up doing a talk once where they wanted me to talk about being more productive. And every employee that was in this, they were asking questions like, I get emails all the time. My bosses won't stop emailing me. Everything's happening via email. And I'm like, well, we really should start batching emails and being more consistent with our email practice because you're getting constantly interrupted and disrupted. But they can't use certain tools because of privacy. There's so many things that are in the infrastructure that it's the way they've always done it. And then the trickier part about that, David, was I said, well, where are the bosses that are doing this? And none of them were in that session. So I'm preaching to the choir at that point, and all I can do is show empathy and say, this is where you can experiment maybe a little bit with, maybe you don't reply to that email right away from that person and see what's going on. But as far as being so, again, rigid in my approach, say, just don't answer emails or only answer emails 3 times per day. That's not going to work in that environment because it's not conducive to it, right?
Right. Well, and even if it's going to work, it's a process of how do you get there? You don't just not tell your boss and all of a sudden not respond as quickly as you have been, because they will make assumptions because you haven't given them information. And, it's not going out on too big of a limb to think that the assumption is, oh, they're not replying as quickly. They're not being productive. They're not working hard. They're not at their desk. They're ... It's all negative. They aren't thinking, oh, they're not replying as quickly. It's because they're a superstar. That's not what they're thinking. But so on the front end, just tell them and really ask. You don't tell them, especially. And frankly, if you're the boss, it should be the same thing.
Right.
You should have a discussion with the people who you're leading and say, hey, what do y'all think about XYZ? And have a discussion, get as much buy-in as possible, and then say, here's what we're doing. But yeah, especially if it's the employee kind of from the bottom up, ask the boss, hey, I was thinking if I check emails first thing when I get in, then at noon, and then, an hour before the end of the day, I'll get back to you. Is that enough of a touch point? And then with that, another specific suggestion that I've seen that works well is set up an alternate method of communication, because that's great unless they've used email as their emergency. Not many people do that anymore because we're all overwhelmed with email.
Yeah.
But if the expectation is, this is really urgent, I'm going to send you an email and you're going to see it immediately and get back to me. They still need to be able to do that sometimes. So if you're not going to let that be email, then tell them, hey, it's my Teams or my Slack or my text or whatever method you guys use.
There's a word that you bring up fairly it's actually later in the book in the appendix, but the idea of conation or conative, I hope I'm pronouncing this right.
Uh,
Conative, right?
Conation or
Conation.
conative.
See,
Yep.
I've never so I go with con, I'm like, right? But it's not. I'm gonna, I would love for you to explain because it's something that I've not come across before, which I'm
Yeah.
surprised at because it literally is probably one of the best things that you can do to cultivate productiveness in your life and in an organization and really improve your relationship with time as a result. So can you touch on that for those that are not familiar and where, let's see, where uh, how understanding those strengths can change the way that we approach, task management and
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, time management.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you are not alone in not knowing of it. You should feel just fine about that. The term was actually in a book of like the 365 most obscure words or something. So it's not well known, which is too bad. And we're trying to change that because the conative part of the mind, and this concept goes back thousands of years to Plato, and it's been talked about by lots of thinkers since then. So it's not a new concept, it's well established, but it's one of three parts of the human mind. So at a very broad level, cognitive, affective, and then conative. So the cognitive part, thinking, your IQ, what you've learned, those kind of thinking skills that you have. All kinds of tests to measure cognitive abilities, from spelling tests in school to IQ tests to on and on and on. If you're a CPA, you took a CPA test, that's a cognitive test. So we all get that part. The
Mhm.
affective is think of it as emotional, the desires, the preferences, and there are all kinds of affective instruments. The MBTI or Myers Briggs, DISC, predictive index, Hogan. I mean, there are probably at least a couple dozen really solid, well known affective instruments, kind of in the general consciousness. There are many more from a clinical standpoint as well, looking at personality disorders that one might have. So, all kinds of affective assessments. And that's, again, it's our preferences, desires, how we feel about things. Then, this third part of the mind, the conative, it's not about thinking or feeling, but it's about action. It drives the way we take action. What we've seen is that it's instinctive. So looks like you're born with it. It's not something that you learn over time. You learn how to apply it and you learn tips and tricks for when there's a mismatch between your instinctive conative strengths and perhaps the way you're supposed to do something at work. But it drives the way you take action. So what we've done at Kolbe Corp, and when I say we, I'm being generous, I'm not really included in the origination of this. My mom developed the first conative assessment, and actually founded the company almost 50 years ago now. Um, but what she identified was that there are distinct action modes around the way we take action. So I won't give you the whole big long description, but at a quick level, so I think it helps to understand.
Yeah.
um, Fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. And I'll just pick one of those to give an example. So, follow through is the way we deal with systems, structure, organization. So, some people are on one end of a spectrum and they really drive toward systems and structure. They plan, they bring things to closure. If you give them a plan, they will follow it through step by step. If you plop them into a situation without a plan, often the very first thing they will do is take stock of what's happening and then say, let me put structure to this. What are my next few steps going to be? At the other end of the spectrum are people who do kind of the opposite of all that. If you plop them into a situation without a plan, they just start attacking it.
Yeah.
And they won't necessarily have, or at least consciously, they won't have a step by step, this is what I'm going to do, and then next and next. It's just attack, go for it, take charge. If you give them a plan and a system, they're likely to find shortcuts. So it's a 12-step plan, and you tell them, here's your 12-step plan, follow it, and we'll, talk when we get to the end. They do steps 1 and 2 and start on 3, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to 6. Oh, I'm gonna do 12 because I start at the end and then I work back. And is either one of those better or worse? No. If you don't tell me the situation, I can't tell you what's better or worse. So getting back to my example of a nuclear power plant, if we're talking about, running the way fuel rods are installed in a fuel nuclear power plant, yeah, I want them following the 12 steps in order. I do not want them to vary and deviate. So
Checklist manifesto kind of stuff, right? Like you don't want
yeah,
the surgeon or the airline pilot or whatever missing those check marks.
yeah, absolutely. And actually, airline pilot's a great example. We've got data, and successful, as rated by their bosses, commercial pilots are toward the end of that spectrum that follows the systems, and even creates systems, but there are more of those follow throughs. They are not those adaptable.
Right.
Now, we don't have a lot of data on like wartime combat pilots. They may not look the same.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know.
Well, it's funny. I'm thinking really quickly because I'm a Green Lantern fan. In fact, most of my most of my things inside of here are my Green Lantern, and I mean, no one can see this, but I've got my Green Lantern sticky notes along with this, so they're in there. But in the movie The Green Lantern, not a great movie, Hal Jordan, played by Ryan Reynolds, disobeys the what do they call it? The warfare rules, right? Like the air combat rules. And that's how he wins. But if he followed step by step by step, which the other pilot did, that was game over for them. So yeah, it'd
Right.
be interesting to see in wartime, there has to be some dynamic elements, I would imagine. But again, it's nuanced.
Right. And I'm maybe broaching another subject here,
Uh-huh.
but it's one that I know you're interested in talking about anyway. One of the things that pops up then is, okay, well, let's take commercial airline pilots. Let's set aside the combat thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, you need somebody who's that checklist oriented, systematic, structured person. What happens when that breaks down? There's a co-pilot in there. My theory, and I don't have data from airlines to back this up, partly because there aren't enough data points of, well, when this breaks down, what's the best team? What I know is they tend to have co-pilots. They're just early stage primary pilots. They're secondary, but they're trying to become the lead pilot.
Right.
And that's great from a development standpoint. They spend time in the cockpit, they learn, they get really good, and then they get promoted. But if you're really thinking about teaming, maybe you don't always want somebody who just is a mirror of this same skills that the other person has. You'd like a little complementarity. So I would kind of think, and this again, this is assuming something has
Sure.
gone wrong. So
Yeah.
since most of the time nothing goes wrong, the airlines are probably doing the right thing to have two of those people. Like what goes wrong is the pilot loses consciousness, and then you want the co-pilot to be able to step in and follow the checklists and the structure and all that. But then there's that time when it doesn't, when things really do break down. That's when I would rather have somebody with a different strength on that team.
Would the navigator fall into that category then? If there's a navigator, because there used to be, I don't know if they're in there anymore, but there used to be. I'm thinking of the movie Airplane where there was 3 of them, right? Because you've got me, and there was the navigator there who seems to be the person that would be like, well, we can't go this way, so we'll go this way. They have to maybe think a bit outside the box compared to
I think the navigator's a computer now.
I
don't
think, yeah,
it's
you're
a human
which is a
anymore,
whole
but
other thing that we could go down. But anyway, keep going.
yeah. Well, no, I think the key thing then is it starts with understanding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was the first question you really asked me. It starts with understanding yourself. And if you're a sole contributor, 100% of the time, it kind of ends there.
Yeah.
But we aren't. And we are not, frankly, designed to be sole contributors all the time. We do better and we achieve bigger, greater things when we work with other people. And at that point, you have to stop only focusing on yourself and start thinking about others and understanding, how do I work best with other people? How do I interact with other people so that collectively we achieve more than we would if we were just individually doing things?
Do conative strengths have an ability to stave off cognitive biases or short circuit them? Or do they have their own biases that can kind of, I'm curious
I
because
mean,
as soon as I'm like, okay, so is this the switch? But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I'd say yes to both.
Mm,
So yes, when you understand this three part of the mind setup, you can use your conative strengths to step in and challenge some of those cognitive biases. Now, you have to have the self awareness to know when that's happening still, which is always tricky. And frankly, that's kind of affective. Some people are so heavily ego driven, they won't let themselves see when they are running into a bias. It's like, well, it's the way I think. I'm not going to challenge that.
right.
Other people are more open to it. But so yes, the conative approach helps you see, oh, you know what? That I'm falling into a cognitive bias and my conative strengths can help me get out of that. But our conative strengths, of course, drive our own biases. And especially in people who don't understand who they are, or even the concept of people are different. And that's one of the reasons, frankly, we're a mission driven business, and the book is as much of a mission as anything else.
Hmm.
It's to help people understand first themselves. Here's who I am, or, for the audience, here's who you are. Here's what makes you great. Let's unlock that. And then the next step is to understand, great. And guess what? People are different from each other. And if you want to be a frankly good member of society and a good leader, you need to understand that everybody is like you and not just tolerate that, but actually embrace it and realize I need those people who are different than me so that my team can accomplish more. Again, if we just have clones of ourselves, it feels good because we aren't being challenged. And, you sit in a meeting and everybody's asking the same questions and patting each other on the back for, oh, look at you. You're all about, we've been talking about follow through. So I'll change.
Hmm.
Let's say it's a brainstorming session and I'm all about, this is the quick start action mode is all about uh, kind of coming up with new ideas and experimenting and going off in different directions. If we're in a brainstorming meeting and other people are like me and doing that, I think they're so smart. Well, it's not about intelligence. It's about that's natural for them. And we all, if we're all the same, it feels great. Yeah, but if the point of this group is to actually move forward and not just brainstorm every single meeting, we're going to have problems because that's our conative bias. That's why in that group, you actually want somebody with a different strength and quick start who's going to push back because it's easy for them. The rest of us in the meeting are brainstorming and wishing we had another hour to come up with cool new ideas for applications on AI. You need the other person in the room who's going like, okay, that's really fun, but we have a project that needs to be done, at the end of the month. What are we doing to move forward? We've got to pick one of these 17 things and move forward with it. So that's where that interplay comes in. And it's really understanding first myself, then other people are different and embracing the fact that they make the world a better place and they make my job easier in the long run.
So if someone's listening to this, first off, you're going to want to circle back and listen to this episode again because we've got a lot of information, which is great. But it also leads nicely to my next question, which is, the idea of overwhelm and burnout
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So what if someone's feeling that way? And interestingly, you talked about advice and we talk about different assessments. And I mean, the Kolbe assessment's well known. Like it's people, in industry know about it, in corporate, in those work environments. I think I've even used it, thinking way back, to hire my assistant as an example, because again, that perspective, right? Like I need that person to go, am I doing the right thing? Even though I'm the person in charge, I need to have someone that can reflect back to me, go, are you sure you want to do it? Really? Okay, well, let me look at that. If someone's
Yeah.
feeling that burnout or that overwhelm, which of course is kind of a precursor to it, what's the first step that they can do to realign with their natural way of working?
Uh, Take stock again of who you are. So sure, if you've taken a Kolbe index, you can literally get the result out and
Hmm.
read the first part of it and think, okay, this is me. If you've never taken a Kolbe index, it's just thinking back to those times when I've really felt in the zone, in a flow state, whatever that really productive feeling is. What am I doing in those times? What does it feel like? How was I working? Focusing on that, like literally kind of being calm. If you meditate, that's a good way to do it. There are lots of techniques for getting back to that, pushing other things out, distractions out. And I know you talk a lot about distractions and how
Hmm.
to keep focused and push them away. So do that. And again, people have different methods that work for them. and then start building things back with how can I use these strengths first? Sure, there are lots of other demands on my time, and there are things that are going to pull me away from that. And I'm not saying that you won't ever need to get out of those strengths, but work with those first. What we see is people get burned out most quickly when they are really motivated, really, desirous for whatever reason of to do something, to accomplish something, but they're doing it in a way that isn't natural for them. So that's why it's do more and more naturally. So it's getting back to this, okay, who am I? What are my natural instinctive strengths in terms of the way I take action? And then use those. But when people are using another one, so gosh, I know that this task, this project, and my role in it really demands that I do things in a way that's not natural for me. You can do that. By the way, this is not the Kolbe index, and what we're talking about here is not talking about whether you can or can't do something in a
Right.
particular way. Sure, I haven't said where I am on all these. On that system and systematic structured one, I am at the unstructured shortcut taking side of things. I can follow a process. Absolutely. It's just not natural for me. And if I have to do that, 6 hours a day, day in and day out, burnout.
Yep.
That is burnout for David Kolbe. So when I realize that, I realize, okay, I'm not going to force myself to do it that way all that much. Now, again, you have to be realistic. And if some of my time I need to do that, a couple quick tips: do it early in the day when you still have energy, because whatever you're doing, you have less energy at the end of the day typically than at the beginning. So do it
Unless you're
earlier.
unless you're a night owl. Flip it if you're a night
And
owl. I would think, wouldn't you?
so early in, I think you just time shift. So maybe that's
Yeah.
early in when you're starting your, I don't mean it, do it at 7 in the morning.
Right. You just shift it
If
down.
you
Like
if
if
you start your best work at 7 at night,
Mhm.
great. Do this at 7 at night. Don't do it at 2 in the morning, even though you're still working at 2 in the morning.
Sure, gotcha. Okay.
And then the other thing is set a time limit around it. So, hey, I'm going to do this. So for me, because this is me, it's a lot about the things that I have to bring to closure. I've done, to me, what it's the important part of a project, and now there's 3 more things that have to get done to tie it up. And I can't delegate it. By the way, if you can delegate those things to someone else, fantastic. Sometimes you can't. For me, it's do those things earlier in my workday and set a time limit. So I'm not spending 6 hours doing that. I'm spending 30 minutes doing that. Even if it means I need to go and do another 30-minute chunk later in the day, I mentally I'm limiting that damage and burnout, because that's what burnout is, when you go too fast for too long. So if you still need to go fast, fine, go fast, but then cut it short.
Or
Do
or
other stuff that's more.
or maybe too
Go ahead.
wrong for too long, right? Like too when I mean wrong, I mean like wrong against your nature, right? That
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
because as a night owl, I'm definitely somebody who does like and I'm like you, so I'm very unstructured, but I have a structure that I can lean into, and I
Yep.
can only and you know when I'm best at doing that, honestly, is when I am tired first thing in the morning. Like, okay, because I can't trust myself at that point in time. Like, I will be ruled by emotion rather than by reason, right? So, like, what do I feel like? And that doesn't necessarily get me to where I want to go. So,
Yep.
yeah, that is. It's funny as we were talking about it, the idea of, and I go back to the conative strengths and the cognitive and the all of that stuff. I think about logic, emotion, and then reason lives in the middle. Like, like one too far in one direction is like very, you're not very human. In fact, you're almost treating yourself inhumane if you can't be logical 100% of the time because that's not what humans are. Conversely, you could be emotional. And if you're emotional too often, you're not going to get very far either because you'll, how did I get here? What happened? Like you didn't follow a logical. So reason kind of plays in the middle, but it's not 50-50. Like when Brene Brown says balance is not 50-50, right? No, and a lot of people have said this. That's
Yeah.
not what balance is. Harmony is probably better or something like that. It's just I wonder if, and I'd love for you to speak to this before we get to the 3 core questions that I share with my membership community is, um, the the time it takes to do this kind of work it can feel almost counterproductive to some people. The pause, the stepping back, I need to do this, but I don't have time. Or I need to do this, but I've tried this stuff before and it does, like all of those preconceived notions that we have. For somebody who is like, this all sounds like I know I need to do this, but how do you stop that but?
A couple ways. I think the first and most important is don't think you have to do this all the time. Some people start thinking, oh my gosh, are you telling me that every time I start a new, project or a new task, I have to stop and calm it? No. Uh, Do it when you're burnt out. So that was the specific question you
Yeah.
asked me is, hey, when somebody's burnt out, so that's the context for that. So do stop yourself and think, when you're, and sometimes literally you can feel your heart racing.
Hmm.
You were working hard, or you just told someone, your wife or your friend or your coworker, I don't know how much longer I can do this, or this is driving me crazy. All those moments are times you're telling yourself you need to do this. When it's just, I got a new assignment in here, but I know what it is. It's just, okay, I've got to get this report done. It's fine. You don't need to do it then because that's more routine.
Right.
But yeah, to me, that's the main thing. And then the other part of it is you really owe it to yourself. So many people, unfortunately, when they hear things that they know are good for them, but they have a mindset of, oh, but it's too much time. Aren't you worth the time? Like, I
Hmm.
understand if it's not productive, again, this is all about productivity. If you're spending so much time centering yourself and pushing out distractions that you actually aren't getting anything done, you've taken it too far.
Yeah.
And by the way, that will happen at times. And we see it, with novices a lot of time. They get so excited, they want to practice that all the time, and it pushes out what they're actually trying to accomplish. But they're also learning a new skill. So I'm not too hard on them.
Hmm.
Like that's actually part of getting good at something is maybe overdoing it for a little while, and then you can put it back in its place.
Yeah.
So,
The friction before the flow. Like that's
yeah,
typically what happens. All right.
yeah.
Three core questions before we wrap up. So, first question, and I ask this of every guest. Uh, Fairly new initiative, but we're starting with it. So, how has your relationship with time evolved over the years? So, can you maybe think of a shift that's helped you partner with it more than anything else? Can you think of a time where, oh, this is my relationship with time now, as opposed to what it was like before?
So I'll start really with a productivity sense, although, I'm 58. So as one gets older, there's a whole different
Oh, yeah.
dynamic about age and time. But I think the question's more focused on kind of productivity and time. And for me, it is really understanding and appreciating. Um, sure, time is finite in a literal sense, but it's more malleable than people often think. And for me, 2 hours isn't always the same 2 hours. And some of this gets back to the doing more and more naturally. When I'm doing something in that flow state, 2 hours isn't long enough. Like I want to keep going. And I've learned not to be too rigid with my time. So, yes, I am an on time person. If you and I have a meeting, I'm going to be there for the meeting on time.
You were
Just because
here.
I think that's,
You were here
yeah,
early.
I think that's the respect thing. You're
Hmm.
planning to be there, and I don't want to waste your time when we're getting together. But I really want and most of the time do schedule my time so that I've got flexibility. So I didn't schedule something right up until our meeting today because if that thing that I'm doing earlier is, I'm engrossed in it, I want to keep going. Um, so for me, that's one of the big things is that, and it sounds a little weird that it is kind of malleable. The flip side of this ties very much into burnout. If I schedule something for 2 hours and I'm really working against my grain, that is the longest 2 hours of my week.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And and some of the time when that's going to happen. So I've had to learn that that's not an easy. It's not just listening to somebody's podcast tell you that. You have to learn it over time, and it's different for everybody. Also,
Sure.
I think some people's sense of time changes more and some people more. It's like, no, I don't know what he's talking about. 2 hours is 2 hours. And I feel that distinctly, but for me, not so much.
What's an approach or a mindset or a system that you feel is like a shift that you've taken that has had the biggest impact on your ability to finish meaningful work?
That's a great question. I think one of them is involving other people more often. It's partly my nature. It's probably also what I was taught is be self-reliant, be able to do all your own stuff. Not that I don't was taught to not collaborate or work with other people, but especially on something like you're talking about getting stuff done. Like, well, that's nobody else's responsibility, David. That's very true. So it's not pushing it off on somebody else and making it their responsibility, but I'm better at achieving those things when I collaborate with other people.
And then finally, if you had to strip down your productivity approach to just one core principle, something like everything else went away, and you could rely on this one thing, what would it be and why?
I mean, it's the book. It's
I kind of
operating in
threw you a
your.
softball with that one, but
You did. Unfortunately, I had just done the work writing the book with Amy, my co-author. But yeah, it's understand who you are and to the maximum extent possible, operate with your strengths, not against them. And you will be way more productive. You will suffer way less burnout.
focus on the app within.
Yeah, good way to put it.
The book is called Do More, More Naturally, Empowering of Effortless Success and the Freedom to Be Yourself. Where can people pick up the book and where can people keep up with the work that you're doing?
So pick it up kind of all over the place, wherever you buy books, Amazon, Audible. If you want the audiobook, it'll be my voice, so it'll be familiar to the listeners today. Goodreads, we have a page there. And then you can go to domoremornaturally.com to see additional stuff and get additional material talking about the book. And then our company's website that talks about a lot of the same stuff is Kolbe, KOLBE.com. And that's where you can get your Kolbe index that we've referenced today.
David, thanks so much for taking the time to have a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Big thanks to David for joining me on the program. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. His book can be found wherever you get books. But again, the show notes has everything that you need. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast 599. You can check out the show notes there or wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can comment on this episode in Spotify as well. I do look at them. And occasionally I will comment to your comment. Also, YouTube. YouTube's another great place to get your podcast, but there's tons of platforms. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure to subscribe to this one. Make sure to subscribe to A Productive Conversation. It's one way to support the show. It also ensures that you won't miss a single episode of what's to come. You can easily search through the archives and so much more. So again, supporting the show by subscribing, it's one way to show that you care. That's it for this episode. Looking forward to bringing you the next one. Until then, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.